So I recently had my third mapping session on the 3-month anniversary of having my cochlear implant activated for the first time. I'm doing great. My speech and quiet score hit 100% this time. I've made progress in the last month on speech and noise as well, and I'm even starting to tiptoe back into music listening a little bit. I'm a happy camper. But like I always say, if it ain't broke, fix it anyway. Hi, I'm Vince, and I have a fantastic audiologist. As you might recall, tinkering with audio equipment is just part of my DNA. I can't help it. Knowing this, she entertains my crazy suggestions and facilitates my desire to experiment with this new sound equipment. Stick around and I'll tell you what we cooked up this time and what effect it seems to be having. But first, like my last mapping session, this one started with an exhausting session in the booth. Pure tone tests with devices and then masking noise in my non-implanted ear, while my implant got the usual workout of repeating words and sentences, both with and without simulated crowd noise. Based on the results from this, she made some tweaks to my map. I have the most difficulty with certain phonemes, like the difference between M's and N's, noon versus moon, done versus dumb, stuff like that. So she boosted the area that can help with that and a couple other minor tweaks. She also increased my input dynamic range, which I'm liking. It just seems a little more natural. And at my request, she widened the directional cone a bit in AutoSense so that it doesn't automatically go to such a narrow focus in background noise. I'd noticed that if my wife and I were grocery shopping, she'd practically disappear if she were just behind my shoulder a little bit and I had to constantly turn to look at her. Then she added a dedicated speech and noise program with a very narrow focus so that when I really needed that functionality, I could manually just select it. So kind of the best of all worlds. You might recall from an earlier video that one experiment my audiologist was willing to try was to set up a program using a custom channel gain map by Professor Mike Marszalek of Arizona State University. The purpose was to increase bass perception, as my biggest complaint about my implant thus far has been that everything is way too high in pitch. However, this custom map didn't actually do anything for pitch perception, which makes sense. It just boosted the lower frequencies and volume. I had her remove this custom program because for me, it just boosted frequencies that made things sort of muddy or honky above the very low end. Oh well, it was worth a try. And finally, I asked her to boost the bass frequencies of my M-Link Phonak hearing aid and give me the option of reducing the vent hole size of my custom ear mold or to plug it entirely, which is what I ended up doing, to help even more with bass response. It's better, I suppose, but not by much. I'll take it for now. The dome for my acoustic ear hook was irritating and I was messing around with it enough that all day long I'd pull it in and out and the wire on the speaker got damaged. It still works, but it's just barely hanging on. So she's having Advanced Bionics send me a new one. I put a drop of epoxy on the base of this one and hopefully that'll keep it in place until the replacement comes. To wrap up my personal progress report, I can say that my mild dizziness seems to have finally gone away. But on the downside, I still can't really smell or taste anything much. It might be starting to come back a little. I sure hope so. Anyway, now came time for my crazy radical request. As I've said often, I hear everything through my CI at too high of a pitch. Over the course of 3 months, I've been getting used to it, but it wasn't really changing as far as I could tell. Functionally, it's been working great for me. I've been socializing successfully, listening to audiobooks and podcasts, doing great on the phone. I've been enjoying hearing birds and wind chimes in my yard this spring and all of that. And I wasn't hating it, but I still wanted to see if I could make it even better by trying to work on that pitch issue with my audiologist. At my first fitting, she set up a secondary music program with one electrode turned off for me to experiment with. I did, and it did make a difference, but not much. I mean, it sounded different, but not really better. And clarity suffered a bit too, so I had her get rid of that program at my second fitting in February. So this time I asked her, well, we turned off one. What do you suppose would happen if we turned off two electrodes? She rolled her eyes and blew a raspberry and said that, no, not really. She said, Sure, let's see. So she wanted to talk to her colleague to see if they could concoct a way for me to accommodate that request, what the best way would be to do that. She came back in a couple of minutes and laid out the plan. First, she copied my new mapping over to my backup Marvel processor. Next, she turned off the two most basal electrodes, number 15 and 16, and made it so that that change would affect all of my programs, AutoSense, speech and noise and music, etc. Then she did a quick mapping tweak to balance out the levels of the 14 remaining active electrodes, and saved this all only back to my backup processor. So now when I want to do an A-B comparison, I just decide which processor I want to use that day or week. As a refresher, here's the theory behind this request. Generally speaking, the outer part of your cochlea is where higher frequencies are perceived. The deeper down toward the center, the lower the frequencies you perceive. When you turn off electrodes in your implant doesn't just not send out signals for those frequencies. Rather, the whole spectrum of frequencies is redistributed among the remaining active electrodes. So what is the logical impact? Well, any given frequency is now going to be stimulated a little further down the electrode, deeper toward the center of your cochlea. The result is that everything will, theoretically, be perceived somewhat lower in pitch than it would be if all 16 electrodes were active. The trade-off? Well, since only 14 electrodes are covering the frequency range of the implant instead of 16, the ability to discern between discrete pitches might be reduced. So I came home from my fitting, slapped on my backup processor, and I've been living with that for several days now. Did it work? I think so. It did lower the apparent pitch of the whole spectrum of sound. Voices now sound pretty much at the same pitch in both my implanted ear and my aided ear. Audiobooks sound better, and that's a huge win. And when I route a virtual keyboard via Bluetooth into just my implant, I can still differentiate between keys on the keyboard all the way up the range. That's another huge win. But there's something going on that still doesn't make sense to me. When I play a tone generator into my implant and slowly increase the pitch, it gets to a certain point after which everything is high in pitch, just like before. So while the fundamental pitch is now reading as correct, the harmonics and overtones are high, but in a more random way. But maybe that'll get better with time. Who knows? If I've learned anything through my process of getting a cochlear implant, is that there is nothing linear, simple, predictable, and maybe even logical about how we hear. It's a messy subject. While it's intuitive to think that my auditory nerve is laid out nice and neat like a keyboard, there's obviously more to it than that, and I have no idea what that is. So here's where it stands. With 16 electrodes active, voices are high in pitch, but over a couple of months they've shifted so that I perceive them as being exactly an octave high. So my brain is obviously trying to organize them into the proper pitch, but the best it can do, so far at least, is to get them to an exact octave above the actual pitch. And that's becoming acceptable. I'm getting used to it. I don't hate it, and even some music kind of sounds okay to me. But a few days into my 14 electrode experiment, I noticed that voices are fundamentally on pitch. My left and right ears agree with each other for the first time, and that's super cool. However, the overtones and harmonics are just sort of randomly high, not an octave high, and that makes things sound a little messy as far as music goes. But here's the thing about that. Music does sound much better. Some of it sounds straight up good. Nothing like I remember it being, but much better than I hoped it would be at this stage. Bass and vocals are pan-center, and stereo guitars are stereo. Just what I was hoping for when I chose to dance Bionics for a bimodal streaming solution. Stuff on the left just sounds distorted compared to the stuff on the right, but at least it's the same basic pitch. And even though the left side is now distorted, it does give me all the high frequency stuff that I've been missing from both sides. I just dug into my late 70s music archive and listened to Michael Jackson's Don't Stop Till You Get Enough. There's some percussion that's made up of sticks hitting Coke bottles that I don't think I've heard since I was on the dance floor on my 21st birthday at the disco. Well, they're back. As far as speech, though, I haven't been out socially very much since my experiment began, so it's a little too early to tell if my speech recognition is the same or worse. I think it's still pretty good, but I suspect that it might be a little less than it was before the experiment. Will this get better in time, like my 16 electrode processor seemed to? I don't know. But if it does, and if my ability to understand people isn't significantly worse, I just may have upgraded my hearing by downgrading my processor. Interesting. I might have a big decision to make. If my speech recognition falls off a bit, but my overall listening experience is subjectively better, do I go with this, or do I fall back on the system that does a better job with speech? At this point, I'm not sure. What would you do? I think if I'd started out with this setting, I'd be sitting here thinking that the thing's working out pretty well. But I'm sure I'd find something else about it to try to improve because that's just the way I am. In a few days, I'll switch back to my 16 electrode processor and live with that again for a week or so, and at that point I think I'll be able to decide the best path forward for me, and of course I'll let you know which way I decide to go, and why. Hopefully by then I'll be able to enjoy food again too. Improved hearing and the ability to taste food? How awesome would that be? Until then, I wish you all well, and thanks for listening.